Hello, it's Chris Kelly with a nonfiction book that I think you're going to enjoy. This particular book is beautiful. I actually have two of these books. One that you will have in your kit called 13 Buildings Children Should Know. I also picked up, just to take a look at it, 13 Bridges Children Should Know. This won't be in your kit, but you may be able to take this out at the library or borrow it. It's really stunning pictures. These books are really well done. When I'm looking at the 13 buildings, I just wanted to go over like how you would use this book. I'm not going to read it all because it's a very long book with many, many pages. But I want to review how you sort of go about using a nonfiction book with small children. Obviously, this book is written at probably maybe a third grade reading level, which means that it's applicable to read to students younger than that. But you would definitely have to put it into bite-sized pieces for them to understand. The first thing that I usually do when I'm using any book is go to the title page, the author's page, and really show them that this is the name of the book, this is the author. Typically, you'd have the publisher at the bottom, which we have, and the year in which it would be published would be on the other side. It's not in this book. It's on the back page. Now, I usually call attention to the year of a nonfiction book because if it's an older book, we want to know that. This particular book was republished in 2017, so it's relatively new. The first text feature that we'll talk about is the table of contents. In this book, it lists all kinds of buildings, 13 to be exact, and it gives you the table of contents. When you're talking to children, you want to talk about table of contents as that's your roadmap. You want to go somewhere? Look at your table of contents. Nonfiction books almost always have a table of contents. In this particular book, they have 13 buildings. I'm going to pick a building that I'm interested in. I would definitely use this book in bite-sized pieces. So a building at a time, a couple of pages at a time. What's nice about this is each building only has like 4 pages. So I'm fascinated with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So I'm going to check my table of contents, and it's on page 14. So another nice feature of nonfiction books, especially ones like this, is they typically have page numbers on them, where fiction books don't. So that really helps. So here's our section on the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Sorry, let me fix my phone a little. The pictures are beautiful. In this particular story, in this book, it doesn't have what I teach the children is that this is the heading, and there's quite often subheadings that would divide your page up. In this particular book, they do something a little trickier where they have a timeline of when it was built at the top of each of the building pages. And then they have sort of like just the details. Those in many ways would be considered the subheading. Another text feature is to use the pictures and then look at the caption. A lot of times when children are using nonfiction, especially when they become readers themselves, they're like, oh, great, a chart. I don't need to look at that. Or, oh, great, a picture. Not that important. Haha. That's not accurate. In nonfiction books, it's actually the most important details are almost always with the picture or with the graphs. So when I teach this to children, I will often tell them about look at the picture first. Look at the caption first. Look at the heading or the subheadings first before you even read the dense part. So in this particular case, we have a picture of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Let me read to you what the caption says. It says, Pisa's bell tower, called a campanile in Italian, or I'm sure I'm saying that wrong in Italian. The people of Pisa wanted a really special tower, higher than all the other towers in Italy, and round too. But what made it the most famous tower in the world? And I would have the kids guess with that. And obviously it's because it's leaning and it's still up. So this particular book has 4 pages allotted to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Here's another picture, which is actually a diagram of a site plan of where the Leaning Tower of Pisa is, what are the other things on the site. I haven't been there before, but it's a whole area. And then it has some subheadings of different parts on the site. Now, this is a book that would be tricky to use with a large group as a read aloud because it's tricky. There's a lot of details on each page. This is definitely a book that you would want to use with a small group and have them go through each piece. Here's another example of a subheading. And again, teaching the children to look at the pictures, look at the captions. They almost always have the most important details. One of the other text features that you definitely want to remind them of is the glossary. And most nonfiction books have a glossary, and that is located at the back of the book. This book is no exception. You could look in the table of contents to find out. I think it's page 47. But they have things like cathedral, lantern, mausoleum. They define all of the words that are used in the story. In this particular case, they're types of buildings or things that went along with the buildings. So going back to the Leaning Tower of Pisa, this book also has a little bit of a quiz tied into it. That's not always found in nonfiction, but it is in this one. So, for instance, it says, how high is the Leaning Tower of Pisa today? And it sends you to page 46, which has the answers. And in this particular says, the clue was how tall is it today? The Leaning Tower of Pisa is 54 meters high nowadays, which obviously, because it's leaning, it's not as tall as it used to be when it was straight up. So this particular page, this is the page, if I were doing this with the class, I would probably Xerox this page and use this page as an example to go through. So I'll just read you this page and I'll pretend that I'm using this with the class. Boys and girls, you know how we've been using these books? So nice pictures of all these famous buildings in the world, most of which I have never been to. They're so fascinating. I printed out a piece of the section on the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Do you remember the other day we talked about how there's this building in Italy that keeps leaning, but it's still up? And it's pretty interesting how it was designed. The folks in Pisa wanted a round tower, and because of that, in different architects doing different things, it has leaned. And so they've tried to straighten it out. It never quite works. It keeps on going back to crooked even when they try to straighten it out. Well, we're going to go over this section. I Xeroxed this page for you so we can talk about it. And the subheading, we talked about that. The top of the book, of the story, says, Teetering on Tiptoe. I'm going to read this. I'm going to have you follow along on the sheet that I printed out for you. The tower really did need a bit of help, leaning further and further to one side over the centuries. The tower had to be closed to visitors in 1990. Somebody had asked that if you could go inside, and the answer is no, it's not safe to do so. The risk is that the tower could topple over and bury people underneath. It was just too great. Have you ever tried to move a tower made of blocks into another position without it collapsing? Well, what would you do? First, 18 steel rings were placed around the tower. So they took 18 steel rings. One side of the foundation, that's what it sits on, was weighed down with 800 tons of lead weights. I mean, we're talking heavy. And they brought the Leaning Tower ever so closer to being straight, but it looked ugly. A ring of concrete was then to be poured around the foundation and anchored, which means like put down, into the ground. Before doing this, they had to stop the groundwater. Now, groundwater is the water that's under the soil. So if you dig down, sometimes at the beach, sometimes you see a little collection of water. Well, that is at the beach, but in your backyard or in the park, it's the same thing. If you dig down far enough, you're going to find groundwater. Depending on how wet or close you are to a lake or a stream, it might be a few inches, it might be a few feet. Well, in Pisa, obviously, they had groundwater there. So in order to do that, they had to stop the groundwater from rising, and it was decided to freeze it. But do you know what happens when water turns to ice? It expands. So if you've ever taken a water bottle and put it in the freezer, you see that it looks lumpy and out of shape. It's because the water inside the bottle, as it freezes, it widens. And that's what happened here. So the tower began to wobble when they did that, and it looked like the end might have been near. Well, sometimes the simplest solution is the best. Finally, 15 meters of soil and mud were dug out very carefully from underneath the bottom plate on one side. It was almost a miracle. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was close to being straight. So over the years, they've done this. So this is just one page in our nonfiction book, and this is about all famous buildings in the world. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.